Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a concept that honestly might just be the ultimate superpower of the 21st century. Think about how your workday actually feels right this very second. You've probably got notifications pinging, an inbox that just magically refills itself, and a dozen browser tabs open while you're trying to hold on to a single cohesive thought, right? We live in a world that is profoundly, perpetually distracted. But what if the absolute best way to stand out, to do truly meaningful and, frankly, lucrative work, is to do the exact opposite of what everyone else is doing? What if the real secret is learning how to fiercely protect your attention? Stick with me, because we're going to explore exactly how you can train your brain to achieve focused success in a deeply distracted world. To really grasp the raw power of this kind of focus, let's actually travel back in time for a second, to 1922. The famous psychiatrist Carl Jung was at a critical and honestly highly vulnerable point in his career. He had just published a book that fundamentally challenged the ideas of his mentor, the legendary Sigmund Freud. Now, disagreeing with Freud back then, that was an incredibly bold, even dangerous professional move. To win this intellectual dogfight, Jung knew his busy city practice in Zurich just wasn't going to cut it. He needed to think sharper and much deeper than ever before. So what did he do? He retreated to the woods in a small village called Bollingen and literally built a 2-story stone house. He called it the Tower. It was a sanctuary where, as he put it, he was entirely by himself, and no one else was allowed in without his explicit permission. No electricity, no distractions, just deep, uninterrupted thought. This strategic retreat wasn't a vacation. It was the absolute foundation of his eventual triumph in psychology.
Okay, let's dive into this and see how Jung's century-old strategy is actually the beating heart of a modern framework, Cal Newport's deep work hypothesis. The core idea here is simple, but it is incredibly profound. The ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at exactly the same time it's becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. Therefore, the few people who actually cultivate this skill and make it the absolute core of their working lives, well, they're the ones who are going to thrive.
To really picture this, imagine a fundamental conflict playing out in your brain every single day. On one side, you have deep work. It's like a master blacksmith forging a glowing sword. These are professional activities performed in a state of completely distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit. This intense effort creates new value, it upgrades your skills, and it is incredibly hard for anyone else to replicate. Then, on the other side, we have shallow work. These are the non-cognitively demanding, logistical-style tasks usually done while your attention is totally splintered. Think frantically juggling emails, checking social media, or sitting in those endless status meetings. These efforts don't really create much new value, and they're super easy to replicate. But here's the truly terrifying part. If you spend enough time swimming in this frenetic shallowness, you actually permanently reduce your capacity to perform deep work at all.
And bringing it back to today, here is the harsh reality of our modern workplace: 60%. Get this, a 2012 McKinsey study found that the average knowledge worker spends a staggering 60% of their workweek just swimming in electronic communication and internet searches. Let that sink in for a second. With close to 30% of a worker's time dedicated just to reading and answering email alone, the modern workday is fundamentally designed to prevent deep work. We are quite literally losing our familiarity with depth because our attention is just being sliced into these tiny, incredibly unproductive slivers.
Now, this fragmented attention is colliding head-on with a massive economic shift. MIT economists call it the Great Restructuring. Basically, our technologies are racing forward, but our skills are lagging far behind. Intelligent machines are literally dividing the labor market right now. If your job consists mostly of shallow work, routine tasks that can be broken down into a neat little algorithm or easily handed off to someone else across the globe, your position is incredibly precarious. You're suddenly competing with automation and a massive global talent pool. But hey, this restructuring isn't all bad news. In fact, there are 3 specific groups poised to reap disproportionate, massive rewards in this new economy. First up, the high-skilled workers. These are folks like the famous data analyst Nate Silver, who can work creatively and abstractly alongside complex, intelligent machines. Second, the superstars. Because technology allows remote work, companies don't have to settle for a local programmer anymore. They can hire the absolute best in the world, like star developer David Hansen, who can work from anywhere. And finally, the owners. These are people with access to major capital, like venture capitalist John Doerr, who actually invest in the new technologies driving this very restructuring. Now look, unless you have a few $1 billion lying around, you probably can't become an owner overnight. But those first 2 categories, those are completely accessible to you, provided you can master hard things quickly and produce at an elite level.
Now, what's really interesting here is how you actually get into those winning categories. Let's look at the story of Jason Ben. Jason was working as a financial consultant, making about $40,000 a year. He quickly realized his job was essentially acting as a human spreadsheet, right? He was spending 6 hours a day manually formatting data, a task he soon figured out he could just automate with a simple Excel script. Realizing his shallow skills made him highly replaceable, he made a bold move. He quit his job, he locked himself in a room with 0 computers, just textbooks and note cards, and spent months fiercely concentrating to learn computer programming. He completely rewired his brain for depth. And fast forward, he graduated at the top of his class at an elite coding bootcamp and immediately landed a $100,000 developer job at a massive tech startup. He literally more than doubled his value just by choosing to go deep.
Jason succeeded because he essentially stumbled into a scientific concept formalized by the researcher K. Anders Ericsson, which is known as deliberate practice. To rewire your brain like Jason did, you've got to follow a very specific formula. 1. You must focus tightly on a single skill. 2. You need constant feedback to correct your approach. And 3. This is absolutely critical. You have to work with 0 distraction. Ericsson is explicitly clear about this. Diffused attention is the absolute enemy of deliberate practice. You simply cannot learn a complex new skill if you've got a browser tab open to social media. It just does not work.
But deep work isn't just about economic survival or, making a bigger paycheck. It's actually a pathway to profound meaning. Consider Rick Furr. He's a blacksmith who spends his days doing incredibly grueling, complex work to recreate Viking-era swords entirely from scratch. It requires intense concentration, gently hammering metal for hours, knowing that just one wrong strike could ruin a whole week's worth of effort. So why do it? Because mastering a craft, pushing your skills to their absolute limit to create something tangible and excellent, it provides a deep psychological satisfaction that philosophers call a glimpse of the sacred. And the best part, you don't need to be a blacksmith to find this. You can uncover this exact same meaning in coding, in writing, or in marketing, as long as you approach it with the care and focus of a true craftsman.
This brings us to a really fascinating psychological concept called flow, which was identified by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. What his research discovered is genuinely surprising. We often assume that what we really want is just to relax, to kick back and do nothing. But it turns out, our brains neurologically prefer the challenge of going deep. The state of flow, where your mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult, is incredibly deeply satisfying. It's wild to realize that a workday consumed by the background hum of nervous mental energy, constantly checking emails and scrolling feeds, actually makes us miserable. We are literally wired to find joy in depth.
Let's move on and see how this builds. Because knowing we need deep work isn't enough. You actually have to architect it into your life. Newport outlines 4 distinct philosophies for doing this. First is the monastic approach. This is radically eliminating all shallow obligations to focus on one singular goal, kind of like a sci-fi author who simply refuses to use email at all. Next is the bimodal approach. Remember Carl Jung? This is what he did. You divide your time clearly, maybe taking a 4-day weekend for deep work in a remote cabin and using the rest of the week for open, shallow tasks. Third is the rhythmic philosophy. This turns deep work into a simple, unbreakable daily habit, like writing every single morning from 5:30 to 7:30 a.m. before the rest of the world even wakes up. Finally, there's the journalistic approach. The famous journalist Walter Isaacson used this to write a massive 800-page book on the side of his demanding day job, instantly shifting into deep writing mode anytime he found just 20 free minutes. The trick is, you have to pick the philosophy that actually fits the reality of your specific career.
Now, whichever philosophy you choose, executing it requires some serious discipline. You need to ritualize your work to remove the friction of getting started. Take the Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer Robert Caro. His office is governed by incredibly strict rules. I'm talking about where his books are placed, how his notebooks are exactly stacked, even what he wears to the office. Every single detail is systemized, so he doesn't have to waste a single ounce of willpower figuring out how to start working. He just sits down and gets right to it. But sometimes a daily routine just isn't enough to reset your mind.
Sometimes you need a grand gesture. Picture J.K. Rowling back in 2007. The pressure to finish the final Harry Potter book was absolutely crushing, but she couldn't focus at home. Barking dogs, window cleaners, kids, it was just way too distracting. So she did something extreme. She checked into a sprawling suite at the 5-star Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, paying over $1,000 a day just to write. The sheer expense and the novelty of the environment sent a powerful, undeniable signal to her brain that this work was incredibly important. It made it so much easier to sustain the immense mental energy she needed to finally cross the finish line. But listen, all these rituals and grand gestures, they will completely fail if you don't confront the primary villain of deep work: network tools. Social media, infotainment sites, constant messaging apps. Most of us use what's called the any benefit approach, meaning if an app offers even a minor peripheral benefit, like, keeping in touch with a distant high school acquaintance just in case, we justify keeping it. We totally ignore the massive, devastating cost it extracts from our daily attention span. We need to drop this immediately. Instead, we have to adopt the craftsman approach. A true craftsman doesn't just use a tool because it's kind of neat. They weigh it ruthlessly against their core professional goals.
So the crucial point is that applying this craftsman approach is ruthless, but it's remarkably simple. Step 1, identify your ultimate professional goal. Step 2, list the key activities that actually get you there. And Step 3, only adopt a tool if it substantially improves those specific activities. Take the famous author Michael Lewis. His core goal is crafting well-written, narrative-driven stories. The key activities for that? Deep, patient research and careful writing. Does a tool like Twitter substantially improve those activities for him? No. Actually, it actively harms the distraction-free environment he desperately needs. So by strictly applying this framework, he can easily justify completely abandoning Twitter regardless of whatever minor self-promotion benefits it might offer.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a direct challenge. The economy is brutally shifting right under our feet. It is rapidly rewarding depth while actively punishing distraction. You have the blueprint now, so the question you have to answer the very moment this ends is this. Are you going to spend the rest of your career frantically cranking widgets, answering emails, and constantly refreshing your feeds? Or are you ready to build your own metaphorical stone tower and master the deep? The choice and your attention is entirely yours.